Start recording. I'm just waiting for them to give me the green light, and then we can go. Okay, here we go.
You're listening to Talkline with Zev Brenner, America's premier Jewish broadcast, on the air since 1981.
And now, here's your host.
Welcome back to the program. I'm Zev Brenner. To Israel we go. We're looking at the situation with Palestinian Arabs and other security issues that threaten the state of Israel. With us right now is ex-Israeli intelligence official who has been involved in special advisor for 15 years in Arab affairs. He's worked with the mayors of Jerusalem. He also has been involved in all kinds of initiatives, including an NGO. He's also done with some American think tanks. He's the specialist when it comes to intelligence in Israel. So we welcome to the program. Thank you for joining us live from Israel. Avi Melamed is on the air with us. Thank you, Avi, for joining us.
Hello, Zev. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And I might add that you've written 4 books. Your latest book is called Inside the Middle East, Entering a New Era. So tell us, on one hand, we're seeing improvements with Saudi Arabia, with UAE. Morocco has more formalized relations with Israel. But yet, when it comes to the Palestinian issue, we're seeing a resurgence of terror within Israel itself, and we're seeing rattling from Hamas and Hezbollah. So from your perspective, as somebody who's monitored for over 15 years, what do you see happening? I see a more dangerous change of events taking place, unfortunately.
Well, Zev, recently we have been noticed, further escalation in the context of the inner Israeli-Palestinian relationship. Unfortunately, it's not something new. This is something that has been going on in lulls of different periods of times. By the way, I would leave Hezbollah out of the equation. Hezbollah is, in a way, a different story. It's a Lebanese-based Shiite organization. When we talk about the Palestinians, we mostly refer to groups like Hamas, Islamic Jihad in Palestine, and others.
But the reason I include Hezbollah because they're dangerous, because they've also have tremendous intelligence capabilities that even Hamas doesn't have because of Iran, and they've been able to penetrate Israeli intelligence in certain cases.
Well, I would put it this way. You're right when you talked about the danger that Hezbollah is presenting. Hezbollah is by far much more serious challenge to Israel than Hamas or Islamic Jihad. Hezbollah has not only an advanced intelligence capacities, it has, I would say, the best of the arsenal, the military arsenal the Iranians are able to offer. And in that sense, Hezbollah is a very serious challenge. Hezbollah and Hamas are Palestinians and they are Sunnis. Hezbollah in Lebanon are Lebanese and mostly Shiites.
Right.
However, as you accurately mentioned, the common denominator is the Iranian mullah regime, who supports both Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and Hezbollah, massively supporting them as part of what we call the axis of resistance, a radical network of armies of terror that the Iranians have been establishing in the region for the last 30 years. And one of the glues that put these all factors together is the non-compromising animosity toward the states of Israel.
Now, let's first start with the Palestinian Authority, headed by Mahmoud Abbas, who's infirm, aging. He's not really in full control. You have a lot of groups that'd like to take over. He's still there, so he still maintains the power, but the groups that are competing, looking to break out, so to speak. And we have the Lion's Den, for example, which is a group that supposedly is part of Fatah, but they're operating on their own.
Yes, Zev, that's correct. But let's put it in the right proportions. Look, Abbas, Abu Mazen, is still in control through the different apparatuses and different financial capacities that he owned personally, very similar to what Arafat used to do with the Palestinian factors. But you're right when you're talking about the current crossroads where the Palestinian Authority and the Fatah, the backbone of the Palestinian Authority is. There is a growing and escalating power struggle within Fatah, where all the different camps are looking to the days of post-Abbas Abbas is, is quite a senior. He's not in a very good health. So all the different camps within Fatah are trying to take positions towards the day post Abbas. You mentioned the Lion Dams. The Lion Dams is it is yet another militant group that operates particularly in Nablus, but I would not exaggerate with the military importance of the Lion Dams. There are different groups operating in different parts of the West Bank, the areas that are controlled by the Palestinian Authority. So definitely, indeed, one of the things that bothers Israeli intelligence and policy making for a long period of time is this clearly eroding influence of the Palestinian Authority on the one hand, and the rising possibility of growing chaos and instability in those areas as an outcome of that process.
Now, you mentioned that about the Palestinian Authority, about the waning influence, but there's a waning influence. There's also situations where they refuse to cooperate with Israeli intelligence. They go through periods of time. So it's a combination of the two. Their influence is waning, and also they, from time to time, want to show that they're independent and refuse to cooperate with Israeli intelligence, even though at the end of the day they do. But like I said, there are periods of time when they withhold working together. At least so they claim.
Well, Zev, those are the exceptional, episodes where the Palestinian intelligence and security services failed for one reason or another to cooperate with Israel. In most of the times, we have to remind ourselves. The Palestinian Authority and the intelligence and security services of the Palestinian Authority has proven more than once that they have the ability to cooperate with Israel and to work with Israel because it's a common interest of both sides. Just as a reminder, not so long ago, we had this incident of the young Druze boy that was killed in the West Bank, in the Palestinian territory controlled area. His body was kidnapped or snatched from the hospital by Islamic Jihad affiliated members in Jenin. The Palestinian Authority and the security services rushed in to solve the problem. I'm sorry?
It was an Israeli Druze, right? That's what we're talking about?
Yeah, he was an Israeli Druze, and it didn't take long until before the Palestinian security services and intelligence services went into action, and actually that whole issue was done and over with in a very short period of time. So yeah, we have to remind ourselves, there has been episodes where the Palestinian services, the security services, or the intelligence services were either lack of willingness or lack of capacities to cooperate, but in most of the times, in most of the cases, they have been proven to be very effective in context of cooperation with the Israeli counterparts.
Now, how important a factor is it that within Judea and Samaria, you have not just Fatah operating, but you have Hamas operates, you have Islamic Jihad, you have other groups too. So while their main base is in Gaza, but they also have a foothold and looking to establish more of a foothold in Judea and Samaria.
Yes, Zev, that is an accurate observation. Hamas and Islamic Jihad indeed are trying to create more and more influence. They do have pockets of influence in areas like Jenin and Hebron, for example. We have a good examples of that. They have been traditionally known to be areas that are hub for both Hamas and Islamic Jihad. Just the same, up until now, Israel and the Palestinian Authority, the Fatah, were able to strongly oppress or to strongly intercept the attempts of Hamas and Islamic Jihad to further develop their infrastructure in those areas. But we know that they are there. They are constantly trying to achieve more and more hold on the ground and base on the ground. The Iranians are very proactively trying to assist that process, and we are aware of that.
Now, talk to me about Israeli Arabs, where they fit into it, because I noticed in the last number of years, a lot of them are calling themselves Palestinian as opposed to Israeli Arabs.
Well, Israeli Arabs are about 20% of the population of Israel. We are talking about 1.2 million people. They are Israeli citizens. Israeli Arabs have what I call the multi-level, multi-layer identity components. They are at the same time view themselves as an Israeli citizens. Most of them are Muslims in their religion. They are part of the Arab nation because their ethnicity is Arab, their mother tongue is Arabic. And yes, most of them will view themselves as Palestinians in the sense that most of them will and are identifying with the core, or at least some of the core narratives of the Palestinians. They view themselves, the Israeli Arabs, they view themselves much closer to their brothers, the Palestinians in the West Bank, to a lesser extent in Gaza Strip. And that being said, we also should emphasize that Israeli Arabs says at the same time we are Israeli citizens, we are citizens of the state of Israel, and we want to stay this way. And many of them are very much incorporated into different systems of the state of Israel, as judges, as doctors and academics, and so on and so on. But yes, these are the components of the identity of the Israeli Arabs. The fact that they are emotionally and even politically identify with the major core narratives of the Palestinians, who they are viewed to be their brothers, that fact for itself is not illegitimate.
We're speaking with former Israeli intelligence official Avi Melamed. He's been a senior advisor on Arab affairs for 15 years in various fields and headquarter roles, including working for 2 mayors of Jerusalem. His latest book is called Inside the Middle East, Entering a New Era. What I find fascinating about Israeli Arabs, that I believe in Jerusalem, I did a survey, and survey after survey, Avi, shows that those that live in East Jerusalem and given an option of keeping Israeli citizenship or opting for Palestinian citizenship will opt for Israeli citizenship over Palestinian ones. I find it fascinating.
Yeah, well, Zev, let me just make some correction, which is very important for the listeners. What you're referring to is the group of Jerusalemite Palestinians, or Palestinians Jerusalemites. We are looking at a population of about 320 or 330,000 people who live in Jerusalem. They are Arabs in their ethnicity. Most of them are Muslims. There is a small Christian group of about 7,000 or 8,000 people. And those people, also known as Palestinian Jerusalemites, most of them bear legal status of a permanent residence of the state of Israel. This is a different group from the Israeli Arabs. Israeli Arabs are fully citizens of the state of Israel. There is a small group of Israeli Arabs that also lives in Jerusalem, but I'm referring, and believe that you're referring to this group of Jerusalemite or Palestinian Jerusalemite, which are about almost 40% of the population of Jerusalem. Most of the Palestinian Jerusalemites indeed have a legal status provided to them by the state of Israel, known as a permanent resident of the state of Israel, which is almost equal to a citizenship. They do have an Israeli ID, they pay taxes to the state of Israel, they receive all the benefits from the state of Israel, including social security and medical services and so on. The major difference between them and an Israeli fully citizen, the major difference is first the Jerusalemite Palestinians who do not have the Israeli citizenship, but they are rather permanent resident. They have an Israeli ID, but they don't have a passport. And the other major difference between them and Israeli citizens is that they cannot participate in the elections to the Israeli government, nor be elected to governmental positions. Yet they can, if they want to, participate both as voters as well as candidates to the Jerusalemite municipality. This is the group you are referring to.
But I'm saying, but the polls show that if they were given an option of going for Israeli citizenship or Palestinian citizenship, the majority, I think it's 70-some%, would rather have Israeli citizenship than Palestinian citizenship. I found that to be fascinating.
Yes, I mean, I don't need the polls to know that. I've been spending many years of my life operating, among other things, in these areas, and I know based upon my conversation with Jerusalemite Palestinians that it is the accurate picture. Most of them overwhelmingly will, of course, prefer to stay under Israel's rule, under Israel's control. Look, it's on the one hand, it's fascinating. On the other hand, it's very clear. I mean, in the end of the day, when you as a person look around, regardless of your identity, politically or religiously or culturally, whatever. If you look around and you live in a neighborhood which is structured and organized and functioning, and right next to you there is another neighborhood that you may be affiliated with the people living in this other neighborhood, but that other neighborhood is very chaotic, very unstable, very challenging. In the end of the day, you will make the very simple and natural and obvious decision to stay where you are in a place that is organized and structured and law is kept and so on and so on. So in that sense, it's not so much fascinating. You know, I just came across an interesting one of the an article published, one of many articles published by Arab columnists referring to what is called migration of Arab young people who are actually, it's not a migration, they are fleeing from Arab states. They are fleeing from Arab states looking for some kind of a hope because where they live is very challenging. So that's not so much not so much surprising, let's put it this way.
No, I hear you, but now let me ask you, we're seeing radicalization even among Israeli Arabs. I was curious to know, when we see these terrorist incidents from homegrown terrorist incidents, is it more from the Israeli Arabs? We find it from the Jerusalem Arabs as well. Where are we seeing most of it, and what are we doing about it?
We did have several of incidents where Israeli Arabs were involved as individuals. Most of the cases as individuals in conducting a terror attacks. There has been some few incidents of Israeli Arab terror cells, but the proportions are very small. In the end of the day, the large portion of involvement of terror attacks is Palestinians from the Palestinian territories under the rule of the Palestinian Authority, or Palestinians in the Palestinian territory that lives under the areas that are ruled by Israel. We also witnessed an involvement of Jerusalemite Palestinians or Palestinian Jerusalemites in some terror attacks. Some of those attacks were conducted on base of what we call the lone wolf. Some of them were carried out by more of like a structured terror cell that was operating more structurally. However, the portion of the involvement of an Israeli Arabs in the large scheme of things in terror attacks, that portion is very, very minimal.
Now, how much of a factor is who the Israeli prime minister is? And we had a center-left government. We have a more right-wing government coming in. Does that affect the level of terrorism, or the terrorism really exists the same, but they use it as an excuse to say, listen, we're now fighting against the extremist right-wing government?
Well, as far as Hamas or Islamic Jihad are concerned, it doesn't really matter who the Israeli government is made of and who is the prime minister. It could be even the most leftist person on the planet. As far as Hamas and Islamic Jihad are concerned, the whole state of Israel is an illegal settlement that it has to be erased. Full stop. So in that sense, from their perspective, there is no really difference in that regards. So what I would say, look, we got the extreme factors like Hamas and Islamic Jihad and popular resistance committees and others that are basically vow and non-compromising animosity towards the state of Israel, and by the way, towards Jews as well. And therefore, they don't really care if the prime minister is X or Y. And that's basically face value the situation regarding that perspective.
No, but as far as the Palestinian Authority goes, does that have any impact? Are they able to mobilize more people for terrorist incidents when they can paint to the big bad Israeli right? Does that help them when that happens?
Well, look, I mean, obviously you can understand, and it's not surprising that now when we are looking at a more right-wing affiliated Israeli government, including some factors that are viewed to be more for the extreme right-wing, obviously you can understand that on the Palestinian side, first, they will further emphasize that government as a negotiable government. Obviously, you can understand from the Palestinian perspectives, and I emphasize from the Palestinian perspective and the Arab perspective, by the way, in general, that government is, is viewed as a fascist government, a government that is blocking any attempts to really get some breakthrough. Again, I do emphasize, of course, this is from the Palestinian perspective. I would say to a larger extent, and then I would say even in a way, ironically speaking, such a government is more comfortable in a way from a Palestinian perspective because it will be rather easier for the Palestinians to further market the narrative that says, we, the Palestinians, we have no counterpart on the Israeli side. Not only that, we have we have extremist right-wing settlers on the Israeli side. And in the context of the battle over the international arena, I would say that, ironically speaking, the more the right-wing Israeli government is, the more it plays to the hands of the Palestinian Authority. In that sense.
Our guest is former Israeli intelligence official Avi Melamed. He has served for 15 years as senior advisor in Arab affairs, including for 2 mayors of Jerusalem, and also he's involved in education. He worked with an NGO and also with other American think tanks. So are you optimistic that things are going to change, or the more that they stay the same?
Well, Zev, look, it's not an issue of optimistic or pessimistic. I think it's mostly about being realistic. I would say something about that in the context of the Israeli-Palestinian trajectory. We have to look at the external picture because in the end of the day, I know it sounds like as if the only players in this issue are the Israelis and the Palestinians. Well, that's not the case. There are many regional factors involved. There are many different big powers in the region and beyond the region that has a lot of saying and impact on what's going on in the trajectory of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Here is what I say today, as I've been saying 5, 10, 15, and 20 years ago, and up until now, I've been very accurate and I was right in my analysis and reading of the reality. Neither the Israelis nor the Palestinians are able to really have today a breakthrough. This is not a game of blame. I don't deal with game of blame. I'm dealing with understanding a complex reality. It actually reflects the inability of both Israelis and Palestinians to really make the inner decision and the inner compromises required in order to be able to go to the table and really start discussing a way out of this very tragic loop. I don't deal with the game of blame. I hold both Israelis and Palestinians equally and mutually responsible for the gloomy reality. But in the end of the day, I think
the reality is that I think part of these Palestinians demand they want a right of return. They want Jerusalem as the capital. As long as they're not going to budge from those positions, nothing's going to change. And from the days of Olmert, or where they were willing to get 97% of the Judea and Samaria, Israel was willing to give it away. They wouldn't accept that then. They're not going to get a better deal today because they're entrenched in their positions. So I wouldn't blame the Israeli side so much as the Palestinian side.
Look, Zev, it's all about narratives and political perspectives. I can easily quote Palestinians who says, look, the Israelis wants to choose all our lands, whatever remain of our lands in the West Bank. The Israelis are forcing siege on Gaza Strip. Again, I'm echoing the Palestinian narratives. I'm not in the game of being right or feeling right. I am here to reflect a complex reality that has many different perspectives and narratives. The question is very simple. Do you want to be right or to feel right, or do you want to be responsible for yourself and for your next generation? That's the major issue. And that's the question that I'm referring to both Israelis and Palestinians. None of the sides own ultimate truth. None of the sides. Israeli narratives, some of the Israeli narratives are very valid. Some of the Palestinian narratives and arguments are very valid. That's not the issue. The issue is, in the end of the day, where do you want to go? What do you want to do with that? And I think this is the issue, the question that has to be asked. I think the more we will be engaged in really trying to be responsible to ourselves and our kids and our next generation, and less engaged with feeling right, the more we'll be able to do that, the better are the odds that we'll have some sort of like a breakout of this tragic loop.
Aside from the fact that this is Israeli Jewish land going back to biblical times, but on a more practical level, let's look at pay to slay, which is supposed to have been outlawed by the United States government during the Trump years. It was a factor, not so much a factor today. You have a situation where terrorism is encouraged because they know that if you're going to kill an Israeli or abduct them or do harm to them, there'll be a financial reward to your family. And despite all the talk that it was going to stop, it's still going on. To me, that's a major factor in what's going on the ground.
Yeah, well, Zev, look, again, as I said, it goes back to the issue of narratives. You do understand that from the Palestinian perspective,
that's an actual situation.
No, but that's from the Palestinian perspective, they don't look at it the way you portrayed it. But that's not the issue. Look, it's in the end of the day, really, it's not an issue of money. Believe me, money finds itself very easily to different bank accounts, with or without the knowledge of the media. It goes back to what I said before, and again, I think that if we all, and I'm saying we, I'm meaning Israelis and Palestinians and other people in the world that have good intentions, if we want to really help people, the Israelis and the Palestinians, to exit this tragic loop, we have to try to depart from the place of narratives and who is right and who is wrong and who, has the more accurate or rightful narrative. And rather, we have to stick into the idea of thinking of, look, there are today some, roughly speaking, 7 million Israelis, or maybe more, 8 million Israelis. There are today something like around, let's say, around 2.5 million Palestinians, and I'm talking about the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. Let's say 3.5 million Palestinians. Nobody is going nowhere. The last shuttle to the moon has left long time ago. The question is now, what do we want to do? Because we could have these conversations forever, and we will still deal with terror attacks. We will still deal with counter narratives. Question is, what do we want to do? And,
so what would you like to see Israel do? So you're saying everybody's stuck in the narrative. So I'm challenging you, Avi, what should Israel be doing that it's not doing?
Well, I think that Israel should be doing a lot of things. I think that Israel, first and foremost, start with this point that I'm emphasizing. Depart from the narratives. Look, I identify and sympathize many of the core Zionist Jewish narratives because I define myself as so. That being said, doesn't mean necessarily that I'm blinding myself to see other things that is happening around. We live in an area of like 400 million people. Arabs, most of them, Muslims, most of them, including the Palestinians. And reality, and I've learned it in many years of my experience, in the end of the day, reality is stronger than each and every one of us. If anyone try to or choose to ignore reality, it's going to come and hit us in the face. And what I'm saying is very simple. I'm saying, look at reality, understand what reality is made of, and now try to find ways where you could make the best out of that complex reality.
So my question is, so what should Israel be doing that it's not doing that you'd like to see happen?
Israel should strive, in my opinion, to move forward towards some sort of like a graduate process of arrangements and understanding with the Palestinians that has to be done in a frame of a regional envelope. Today, there are circumstances that theoretically could ensure such an envelope. We are looking at the time of the Abraham Accords. We are looking at a region that is dramatically changing. We are looking at a region where the major Arab players like Saudi Arabia and Egypt and Jordan and United Arab Emirates and Qatar, they have change of priorities and change of interests. If the state of Israel, the government of Israel, will be wise enough to take these times, these very specific, unique circumstances, and to try to make out of it a long-term process arrangement that could lead to some sort of an agreement with the Palestinians, yes, it will involve inevitably some concessions on the Israeli side, some painful concessions.
What kind of concessions can you see Israel making or should be making, in your opinion?
I think that Israel should make concessions, for example, when it comes to issues of some of the settlements in the West Bank. Some of the settlements in the West Bank is irreversible reality. Some of the settlements is not an irreversible reality. This is one example. I expect the Palestinians as well to do some major concessions. You mentioned earlier, and you're right, when you said, Palestinians are talking about the right of return and stuff like that. Well, that's not going to happen. And they have to absorb that. Every side to this conflict have to absorb initially, in the end of the day, the understanding that you can't walk away with 100% of whatever you want. You can't, unless you want to continue this conflict forever and ever. I think today there is a very interesting and unique circumstances of circumstances that the government of Israel, and I don't deal with the Palestinians. I first and foremost hold my government accountable, at least that the government of Israel will be proactively trying to think out of the box, trying to move forward with some sort of innovative thinking about how to address this conflict. And the starting point is very simple. The Palestinians are not going anywhere. We are not going anywhere. It's a matter of a fact. The sun is rising in the east. It sets down in the west. The Palestinians are going nowhere. Israelis are going nowhere. Now, what do you want to do with that? And this is the point where you have to adopt and apply an innovative, out-of-the-box thinking, not out of some sort of guilt or whatever, but out of responsibility. Responsibility to our kids, to our
Israel has done that. They've done it with the Oslo. Israel has done the Oslo Accords. They've made pullbacks. They were willing to give up 97% during previous negotiations. None of it came to naught because the Palestinians weren't willing to compromise as much as the Israelis were. I think it's changed today. The Palestinians want to do less. There's corruption. They want to keep the status quo. They have their jobs, their power, their money. I don't see anything changing. Israel has always been willing and has conceded in the past. Each time they made concessions, they got very little in return for it. That's where the problem lies.
Look, Zev, let me tell you something that will surprise you. I agree with you. The Palestinians, in many ways, failed to come to the table and fulfill whatever. The Israelis as well. But my job is not to give the invoice to the Palestinians. My job is to give an accurate, the best possible way reading of reality. And when you are talking to me in my capacity, not as a Middle East expert, but also as an Israeli Zionist Jew, my starting point is that I turn to my government because I cannot control what the Palestinians are doing with the government. I can try and be controlled in what my government is doing. And again, let me reiterate, I definitely do not exempt Palestinians from responsibility. I do hold Palestinians the same way I hold Israelis accountable for the gloomy situation. Moreover, I would say to you, Zev, people that are either out of a good intentions or for other reasons are exempting Palestinians from responsibility This is a big mistake. It's
You remind me of the
probably-
story, Avi, where a priest, a minister, and a rabbi were arrested for engaging in an illegal game, and they go up in front of the judge, and the Catholic priest goes, "I was not there," and the other minister says, "I wasn't there," and then they say to the rabbi, "Were you part of an illegal game?" And he goes, "With whom?" The problem is there's nobody to talk to over here because they've demonstrated time and time again that they're not serious negotiators. They want it all. I don't even think they want Israel to give it to them. They want the United Nations, some other body, to give them a Palestinian state. They don't want it to come from Israel. That's part of, I think, the psyche from way other analysts have looked at it. So Israel can give them 99%, 100%. They want it on their terms, not that the Israelis gave it to them.
You know, Zev, I want to have Lamborghini, but it's not working. You know, I don't have enough money to have a Lamborghini. Look, again, it goes back to what I said before. My job is not to think or say what the Palestinians need or don't need or whatever. My job is to try to understand this complex reality and to try to understand what can be done with this complex reality, because this complex reality have a couple of major facts that cannot be ignored. And by the way, I think that you will agree with me. In the end of the day, it's not necessarily categorically speaking they. It's like saying, you know, all the Israelis are X or all the Palestinians are Y. That would be inaccurate. There are different voices. There are different trends. There are different thoughts. In the end of the day, and again, I'm now talking as an Israeli Zionist, proud Israeli Zionist Jew. I'm saying in the way I look at things, our responsibility first and foremost is to ourselves and to our next generation. And our responsibility starts with understanding the reality. And the reality is very clear. There are 3.5 million Palestinians. There are 8 million Israeli Jews. Nobody is going nowhere. There is a conflict between the sides. What do you want to do with that?
Final question. And here's where I think the sticky point is that in years past, when they talked about dismantling some settlements, which I think is a bad idea, but they're talking about it, or they're talking about some of the settlements said they would rather live where they are, even if it's under a Palestinian state. And the problem is the Palestinians would never acquiesce to having Jewish settlements, even as part of a Palestinian state. And it was true then, and I'm sure it's true today.
Yes, I'm familiar with this argument or this narrative. What I can tell you about some small things I learned about the Middle East: never say never when it comes to the Middle East. You know,
That's a Jewish optimism. A Jew never gives up. But the fact is, you got to have somebody on the other side. Anyway, Avi Melamed, former Israeli intelligence officer, senior advisor on Arab affairs for over 15 years, including the two Jerusalem mayors. His fascinating book is called Inside the Middle East, Entering a New Era. I think you're more optimistic than reality on the ground, sir, but I love your optimism. And listen, we all hope and strive for peace, but you got to have partners who want to be on the same page as you. And unfortunately, in the Palestinian side, I don't believe we've seen that.
Well, Zev, thank you for having me. We, in a way, have different perspectives on that issue. I go back to what I said. It's about taking responsibility. Israelis has to take responsibilities. Palestinian has to take responsibilities.
I believe we have, but we're waiting for the other side, which hasn't been forthcoming. But I appreciate you being. We got to keep the dialogue going.
I will be more than happy to do that, Zev.
Ourselves. Anyway, thank you, Avi.
My pleasure. Bye-bye. Shalom.
Thank you for tuning in to Talkline with Zev Brenner, America's premier Jewish broadcast, the pulse beat of the Jewish community.
For continuous Jewish programs, TalklineNetwork.com, or our 24-hour-a-day listen line at 641-741-0389. For past shows, you can find us on iTunes, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube, Instagram, and all major podcast platforms, or jewishpodcast.org. Thanks for listening to the TalklineNetwork.com.
Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.